Welcome to the fourth episode of the Siege of Antioch. In today's episode, we will witness one of the most desperate phases of the First Crusade. After spending months fighting to capture Antioch, the Crusaders finally seized the city, only to find themselves trapped inside its walls. Their victory quickly turned into a new nightmare. With Kerbogha of Mosul approaching at the head of a massive relief army, the Crusaders faced a new siege, this time as the defenders. As Kerbogha's forces surrounded Antioch, the Crusaders struggled to defend the city against relentless attacks. Hunger spread, morale collapsed, and divisions among the Crusader leaders threatened to tear the army apart. The city they had fought so hard to conquer had now become their greatest challenge. From the battles around Antioch's fortifications to the struggle for control of the Citadel, this episode explores how the Crusaders endured a siege from within, facing starvation, fear, and the constant threat of destruction. Following the capture of Antioch, the Crusaders celebrated what they regarded as one of the greatest victories of the First Crusade. However, once the initial excitement faded, the reality of their situation became clear. After spending nearly 8 months fighting to capture Antioch, they now found themselves confined within the very city they had struggled to seize, facing the imminent arrival of Kerbogha's massive relief army, which threatened to surround and besiege them. But the victory also provided several important advantages. Antioch's massive fortifications had survived the fighting largely intact, offering strong protection against the approaching army of Kerbogha. The Crusaders' civilian followers, despite having been greatly reduced by disease and desertion, could now take shelter within the city instead of remaining exposed outside its walls. In addition, the Turkish garrison defending Antioch had been almost completely destroyed, eliminating a constant military threat from within the city. Despite these gains, serious problems remained. The city's extensive defensive walls required far more soldiers than the Crusaders could spare. More importantly, the Citadel still remained in Muslim hands. Although its defenders were too few to launch a major attack, their elevated position allowed them to observe activity throughout the city and maintain communication with Kerbogha's approaching army. The Crusaders had also expected Antioch to provide much-needed supplies, but these hopes proved unfounded. Food stores were scarce, and much of the city's wealth had been destroyed during the assault and subsequent looting. Relations with the local Christian population also created uncertainty. Many of the native Syriac Christians had previously cooperated with the city's Turkish rulers and showed little loyalty to the Latin Crusaders. Their uncertain allegiance posed a greater danger now that the Crusaders were defending the city from within. The capture of Antioch also intensified an important political dispute: who should ultimately control the city? However, this question had to be postponed. Kerbogha's army was advancing rapidly, making the city's immediate defense far more urgent than settling questions of ownership. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, Bohemond realized that he could not defend Antioch without the support of the other Crusader leaders. Responsibility for the city's fortifications was therefore divided among the princes, each taking command of a different section of the walls. At the same time, the army began clearing the city and burying the dead to reduce the risk of disease caused by decomposing bodies. While these military and public health measures were underway, Bishop Adhemar of Le Puy supervised the purification and restoration of Antioch's churches, including the Cathedral of St. Peter, so that Christian worship could resume. The imprisoned Patriarch John was released and restored to his rightful position as Patriarch of Antioch. Although John was a Greek cleric who generally viewed the Latin Crusaders with suspicion, he remained the legitimate patriarch of a church that was still in communion with Rome. Adhemar respected both ecclesiastical legitimacy and local tradition, making John's restoration a natural decision. Most Crusaders accepted this outcome, recognizing the hardships John had endured for his faith. Bohemond, however, may have viewed the restoration less favorably, as it could complicate his own political ambitions in Antioch. The first signs of this danger appeared when advanced scouts from Kerbogha's army reached the outskirts of Antioch. A Muslim reconnaissance force of around 300 cavalry cautiously approached the city, first sending a detachment of 30 horsemen to observe the Crusaders' positions. The appearance of this small group tempted Roger of Barneville, a distinguished Norman knight from southern Italy, known for both his military skill and diplomatic ability. Believing the enemy to be vulnerable, Roger rode out from Antioch with only 15 experienced companions in an attempt to attack them. As the Muslim detachment withdrew, he pursued them beyond the safety of the city walls. This proved to be a costly mistake. The retreat had been deliberately staged to lure the Crusaders into an ambush, a tactic frequently employed by Turkish cavalry. Once Roger had been drawn far enough away, the remainder of the Muslim scouting force emerged from concealment in a nearby valley and surrounded his small party. According to the chronicler Albert of Aachen, Roger realized the danger and attempted to fight his way back to Antioch despite being heavily outnumbered. As he neared the shallow crossing of the Orontes River, he came within sight of the city walls and was close to reaching safety. Before he could escape, however, a Turkish horseman overtook him and shot him with an arrow that pierced his back and fatally wounded him. Roger fell from his horse and died within full view of the Crusaders watching from the city's ramparts. After the battle, the Muslims decapitated Roger's body and displayed his head on a spear as a symbol of their victory. The spectacle deeply shocked the defenders inside Antioch and served as a powerful demonstration of the enemy's confidence. Roger's body was later recovered by the Crusaders. Bishop Adhemar of Le Puy, together with the leading princes of the expedition, arranged for him to receive an honorable burial at the entrance of the Basilica of St. Peter. Even so, the loss of such a respected and experienced knight had a profound effect on morale. Many Crusaders interpreted his death as a troubling omen. One contemporary remarked that the death of this most illustrious and beloved knight filled the entire army with sorrow and fear. Roger's fate underscored the severity of the Crusaders' situation. Far from their homeland, weakened by months of hardship, disease, and continuous warfare, they now faced the prospect of being encircled by a vastly superior force with little apparent hope of escape. On the 5th of June 1098, Kerbogha reached the Orontes River at the Iron Bridge, where the Crusaders had left a small garrison to guard this vital crossing. The defenders were quickly overwhelmed, and almost the entire garrison was killed. Only the Crusader commander was spared. He was taken prisoner, chained inside one of the bridge's towers, and left to languish there. The Crusader leaders quickly concluded that they could not confront Kerbogha's army in an open battle, as they had successfully done against Ridwan's forces in February. Kerbogha commanded a much larger army, reportedly outnumbering the Crusaders by as much as 2-1. More critically, the Crusaders were suffering from a severe shortage of cavalry because months of campaigning had left them with very few serviceable horses. The chronicler Albert of Aachen believed that this shortage explained why the Crusaders had been unable to rescue Roger of Barneville during the earlier skirmish. According to his account, only about 150 horses remained in the Crusader camp, and these were severely weakened by the lack of fodder. By contrast, the Turkish cavalry rode well-fed and well-conditioned mounts. Although the Crusaders captured around 400 Turkish horses after taking Antioch, the animals had not yet been trained according to Frankish methods of warfare and could not immediately replace their exhausted cavalry mounts. Given these circumstances, the Crusader princes abandoned any plan of fighting in the open. Instead, they relied on Antioch's formidable fortifications and prepared to defend the city from within. With the route to Antioch now open, Kerbogha could have launched an immediate assault. Instead, he proceeded cautiously. He established his main camp approximately 3 to 5 kilometers north of the city, near the junction of the Orontes River and its tributary, the Karasu. From this position, Kerbogha took time to assess Antioch's formidable defenses, while also establishing communication with the Muslim garrison that continued to hold the city's citadel. Soon after establishing his camp, Kerbogha turned his attention to La Mahomerie, the siege fort that the Crusaders had constructed outside Antioch's bridge gate during their own blockade of the city. The Crusaders appear to have abandoned their other outlying positions, including Malregard and Tancred's Tower, but they remained determined to hold La Mahomerie because of its strategic importance. The fort controlled access to the road leading to St. Simeon, the Crusaders' only remaining supply route. Over the next 3 days, Kerbogha tested the defenders by launching repeated assaults with approximately 2,000 troops against the fort's improvised defenses. Responsibility for its defense fell to Robert of Flanders, despite the fact that Raymond of Toulouse had previously commanded the position during the Siege of Antioch. With only about 500 men, Robert resisted successive Muslim attacks for 3 days. However, recognizing that the position could no longer be held, he withdrew his garrison into Antioch under the cover of darkness on the night of 8th to 9th June. Before leaving, the Crusaders set fire to La Mahomerie, destroying the fort to prevent it from being captured and used by Kerbogha's forces. At roughly the same time, though the exact date is unknown, another Crusader outpost outside the Gate of St. Paul came under attack. Commanded by Godfrey of Bouillon, the garrison fought a determined defense but was eventually forced to retreat into the city after suffering approximately 200 casualties. During this period, Kerbogha also established contact with Shams ad-Dawla, the son of Yagi Sion and the commander of Antioch's Citadel. Although there may have been some initial discussion regarding authority over the city, Shams ad-Dawla soon realized that he was in no position to negotiate. Kerbogha insisted that control of the citadel be transferred to his own forces. Shams ad-Dawla requested permission to remain in command until Antioch had been recaptured, but Kerbogha refused. He was compelled to surrender the fortress and its supplies to Kerbogha's trusted lieutenant, Ahmed ibn Marwan, who assumed command of the citadel. With La Mahomerie destroyed and control of Antioch's citadel secured, Kerbogha launched the next phase of his offensive. He began repositioning his army to the southeastern corner of the city, close to the fortress. From there, he could coordinate directly with the Muslim garrison inside the citadel and use it as a base for attacks against the Crusader-held city. Recognizing the danger, the Crusaders attempted to disrupt this maneuver by launching an attack near the Gate of St. George. Fierce fighting continued throughout the day as both sides struggled for control of the area. The battle proved exceptionally brutal, leaving many participants physically exhausted and mentally drained. Some contemporary chroniclers even described Crusaders experiencing extreme fatigue, hallucinations, or sensations resembling out-of-body experiences amid the relentless combat. By the end of the day, the Crusaders were unable to halt Kerbogha's advance and withdrew behind Antioch's walls. Their retreat allowed Kerbogha to establish a fortified camp beside the citadel, enabling close coordination with its Muslim garrison and strengthening attacks against the southeastern sector of the city's defenses. From this position, Turkish forces began concentrating in and around the citadel on the gentler eastern slopes of Mount Silpius. Additional troops were deployed to blockade the Gate of St. Paul in the northern part of the city, further tightening the encirclement of the Crusaders. From 8th of June, as Kerbogha concentrated the bulk of his forces around the citadel, Bohemond was reinforced by Robert of Normandy and Robert of Flanders. Even so, the Crusaders could not afford to commit too many troops to this sector. Godfrey of Bouillon remained in the city to defend the Gate of St. Paul, while Raymond of Toulouse divided his forces between supporting the fighting near the citadel and protecting the bridge gate. By 10th of June 1098, Kerbogha was ready to launch a major assault on Antioch. Like the Crusaders before him, he faced the formidable challenge of overcoming the city's massive fortifications. However, unlike the Crusaders during their earlier siege, Kerbogha possessed a decisive strategic advantage: control of the citadel. From this commanding position, he could threaten the entire stretch of walls along Mount Silpius, and more importantly, potentially gain access to the narrow path that descended from the fortress into the lower city, creating an opportunity to strike directly at the Crusaders' defensive positions. Although Kerbogha now controlled Antioch's citadel, its position presented significant geographical challenges. The fortress stood in an isolated location on the summit of Mount Silpius, separated from the surrounding high ground by steep, rugged terrain. At the time of Antioch's capture, Bohemond had raised his banner on a tower approximately 300 to 400 meters north of the citadel. Between the two positions lay a deep ravine containing an ancient cistern, while the only road leading to the Citadel crossed a narrow strip of ground less than 30 meters wide along the edge of a steep precipice. By holding this elevated position, the Crusaders controlled the only practical route connecting the Citadel with the city below. The terrain to the west and north was so steep and broken that it was virtually impassable, making any alternative approach extremely difficult. By the time Kerbogha assumed control of the Citadel, Bohemond had also established a camp on the ridge of Mount Silpius opposite the fortress. The two forces faced one another across a narrow rocky valley that formed a natural barrier between their positions. From this vantage point, Bohemond controlled a substantial section of Antioch's walls and several nearby towers, allowing him to monitor and, if necessary, contest movement along the narrow path linking the Citadel to the lower city. Realizing what Kerbogha was planning, the Crusader leaders decided to strike first. Hoping to disrupt the coming offensive, they emerged through a small postern gate on the southern ridge of Mount Silpius and launched a surprise attack against the Muslim camp. The assault initially caught Kerbogha's forces off guard, forcing them to retreat. Encouraged by this early success, some Crusaders broke formation and began looting the abandoned camp. Their discipline quickly collapsed, allowing Kerbogha to launch a powerful counterattack. Caught in the open, the Crusaders retreated in disorder toward the narrow postern gate. According to a Frankish eyewitness, the passage was so confined that many men were crushed to death in the panic as they struggled to escape back into the city. The failed attack left the Crusaders shaken and demoralized, but an even greater danger soon followed. Seizing the initiative, Kerbogha launched a coordinated offensive. Troops from the Citadel advanced against Bohemond's position on the heights of Mount Silpius, while simultaneously descending the narrow path toward the city. At the same time, additional Muslim forces outside Antioch attacked the city walls south of the Citadel. Confronted with assaults from both inside and outside the fortifications, the Crusaders were forced to defend two fronts at once, stretching their already limited manpower to its limits. One Frankish eyewitness later recalled that the fighting raged from morning until evening with an intensity unlike anything they had previously experienced. As the first day of fighting drew to a close, a Frankish knight known as Hugh the Insane became isolated atop one of Antioch's towers, surrounded by several Turkish warriors. Realizing that escape was impossible, he continued fighting for as long as he could. According to a chronicler, Albert of Aachen, after being struck by numerous arrows and seeing no hope of survival, Hugh deliberately leapt from the tower into the enemy below, turning his final act into one last attack against his opponents. His death was later remembered as an extraordinary display of determination and self-sacrifice. Around the same time and in the same sector of the battlefield, Bohemond was struck in the leg by an arrow. Contemporary accounts describe the wound as bleeding heavily, and some chroniclers suggested that the injury affected not only his physical condition, but also his confidence. Although he remained in command, the incident appears to have reduced his effectiveness during the fighting that followed. What alarmed the Crusaders most was Kerbogha's ability to sustain a relentless assault. With a much larger army at his disposal, he continuously rotated fresh troops into the fighting, allowing attacks to continue from dawn until dusk for 2 consecutive days. The intensity of the battle left the defenders with little opportunity even to eat or drink. The constant pressure severely weakened morale. Some Crusaders abandoned their positions by lowering themselves from the city walls with ropes, while rumors spread through Antioch that the defenders faced certain destruction. As fear grew, even experienced knights began to desert. Among those who fled were William of Grandmesnil, his brother Aubrey, Guy Trousseau, and Lambert the Poor. Escaping under cover of darkness, they made their way on foot to the port of St. Simeon, where they falsely informed the sailors that the Crusader army had been destroyed. Panic quickly spread through the harbor as many sailors rushed to their ships in an attempt to escape. Seizing the opportunity, Turkish forces attacked the port, killing those they caught, burning ships that remained at the river mouth and capturing their cargoes. Given the relentless attacks and the increasingly desperate situation inside Antioch, it is not surprising that many Crusaders considered fleeing. On the 11th of June, rumors spread that even the Crusader princes were preparing to abandon the city and retreat to the coast. To restore confidence, the leaders publicly swore an oath that they would not desert Antioch. Even then, according to one Provençal chronicler, a mass exodus was prevented only after Bohemond and Bishop Adhemar of Le Puy ordered the city's gates to be closed. Bohemond had not expected the campaign to unfold this way. He appears to have assumed that Antioch's citadel would soon surrender and that Kerbogha, even if he arrived, would face a prolonged siege similar to the one the Crusaders had just endured. Instead, the citadel remained in Muslim hands, giving Kerbogha a strategic foothold from which to threaten the city. This unexpected development undermined Bohemond's plans. A day or two later, Bohemond encountered a new crisis as many of his soldiers refused to leave the safety of the houses they had occupied and rejoin the fighting around the citadel. Frustrated by their reluctance, he ordered parts of the city to be set on fire in an attempt to force them back into battle. The fire quickly spread out of control, destroying around 2,000 houses and damaging many of Antioch's historic buildings. It came close to reaching the Basilica of St. Peter and the Church of St. Mary before it was contained. Despite the destruction, the blaze appears to have succeeded in driving some reluctant Crusaders back into the fighting. As the siege continued, religious belief and medieval superstition began to play an increasingly important role in the Crusaders' response to the crisis. On the 11th of June, a priest named Stephen of Valence claimed to have received a vision of Christ and the Virgin Mary, in which the Crusaders were rebuked for their sins and instructed to purify themselves for 5 days. According to the chaplain Raymond of Aguilers, Stephen publicly swore that his vision was genuine and even offered to undergo dangerous ordeals to prove its authenticity. Although his account did not immediately transform morale, it marked the beginning of a growing wave of religious fervor among the Crusaders. A few days later, on the night of 13 to 14 June, as the defense of Antioch neared collapse, an unusual light was reportedly seen in the sky above the battlefield. Some Crusaders interpreted the phenomenon as a divine sign. One contemporary claimed that the fiery light appeared to descend toward the Turkish camp, causing fear among Kerbogha's troops, who were said to have withdrawn in panic the following morning. The Crusaders regarded the mysterious light as a divine sign, while modern historians often suggest it may have been a comet or another astronomical phenomenon. Whatever its nature, it strengthened Crusader morale and unsettled many of the Muslim troops. On the 14th of June, however, Kerbogha altered his strategy for practical military reasons rather than superstition. After 4 days of unsuccessful attempts to break through the Crusader positions near the citadel, he concluded that this approach was proving too costly. The narrow, rugged terrain and Antioch's formidable defenses prevented him from fully exploiting his numerical superiority, while maintaining troops on the slopes of Mount Silpius created serious logistical difficulties, particularly in supplying food, fodder, and water. Kerbogha therefore redistributed his forces to tighten the siege around the entire city. A strong garrison remained in the citadel, while additional troops reinforced the blockade of the Gate of St. Paul, the Bridge Gate, and the Gate of St. George, completing a more comprehensive encirclement of Antioch. Although the focus of the fighting shifted, the clashes near the citadel did not end. Raymond of Toulouse remained with a substantial force to contain the citadel's garrison, while the rest of the Crusader army prepared for the decisive battle ahead. For the Crusaders, Kerbogha's change in strategy brought welcome relief. The intense fighting around the citadel had stretched their limited manpower to its breaking point, and the reduction in pressure on that sector allowed them a brief opportunity to reorganize their defenses. Conditions inside Antioch continued to deteriorate as severe famine took hold. During the previous 8 months of siege, the city's food supplies had been almost completely exhausted, leaving little for the Crusaders after its capture. Before long, they faced starvation even worse than the hardships they had endured during the previous winter. Contemporary accounts describe desperate attempts to find anything edible. Some searched the ground for roots and wild plants, while others boiled the hides of long-dead horses and oxen or chewed pieces of leather in the hope of extracting some nourishment. The suffering affected civilians as well as soldiers. Chroniclers recalled mothers unable to feed their infants because starvation had left them without milk, a tragic reminder of the human cost of the siege. For now, we will end the episode here. In the next episode, we will explore the continuing skirmishes around Antioch, why Byzantine Emperor Alexios turned back before reaching the city, the discovery of the Holy Lance, and the decisive final battle against Kerbogha's army. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.